Okay, welcome everyone. This is the Embodied Dialogue podcast, and I'm excited to be talking. I think it's our third conversation. I'm talking here with Clayton Nyakana, who is a writer, a podcaster, a computer programmer, and I believe maybe you are doing some coaching these days as well. Is that correct?
No, not yet. But I'm training to become a counselor,
Perfect.
like
Okay,
a
well,
therapist.
the reason I want to talk to Clayton today is he's just written something that I think would be very helpful to a lot of people. And I know from previous conversations that even informally, you've been the kind of person that friends turn to help work through, issues in their life. And the paper you wrote was called The Embodied Steward. And this is a really thorough paper. It's funny, I want to say it's academic, but it's not. But the reason the word academic comes up is like you really did your research. There's all kinds of citations. You're referring to a lot of the thinkers that, at least in the online spaces that you and I tend to move in, are prominent. People like John Vervaeke, Robert Sapolsky, Michael Levin. There's others. So I'm really impressed with, you really did your homework, and at the same time, you aren't doing this in an academic institution. You're a dad. You're a real world guy, dealing with life, and that's what this paper is really about. So this is an extensive paper, which you've written, and I really recommend people listening to us today check it out. But you've also written on your Substack recently a series of articles that basically seem to be where this paper came from, and they're very accessible, like everyday life situations. So I was really just touched and inspired by the way that you're bringing these everyday situations, but with a real depth of thought and care that you brought to it. And so I've got all these notes both on the paper and some of your recent articles. But I'd love to just give you an opportunity to talk about it, and maybe a cool place to begin, since, as I understand it, it is the place you began. You went out in the rain one day and you said, my skin got wet, but I realized I was still dry. And so anyway, I'm going to tee it off like that to you. Please fill in any other things you'd like to say, about yourself generally and the Embodied Steward. But that's kind of the juicy starting point, is like, how did you go out in the rain and not get wet? That's kind of funny.
Yeah, I know. It was so weird that morning. Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me, Seth. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And yeah, this whole embodiment is just it's a strange thing. Like it's always been there, I guess. Like it's always been familiar. But that one morning, uh, I went to pick up an umbrella running through the rain, and it just really struck me. Like I literally did not stop thinking about it because it it seemed as something that should be obvious. It's like, oh my God, I just got rained on. And I'm like, wait, hang on. My skin is a bit waterproof, so the water doesn't get in me. So who is this me, right? It's like, and then fall into that differentiation loop of, okay, at which point do I stop? At which point, do I start? Wait, what is outside? What is inside? And sort of like delineating all of that. Uh, so that I just kept thinking about it and going down that rabbit hole. And as I was doing that, all the works of these people started to sort of like resurface, like how you read a bunch of things and then they're sitting in the background, kind of
Mhm.
like fermenting. And
Right.
then this moment happens and it all comes back and it seems like it's all starting to fall in place and arranging itself. Um, so it was that kind of experience. And so I slowly started to kind of like revisit some of these materials I'd read, especially like Michael Levin's work. it sort of like made sense because it was so strange that I had always known, like since high school biology, you read about impulses and how the body has automated itself in many ways. And you kind of like read about it and you go like, okay, right. But then when you start to experience, it's like, oh wait, it seems like my body is doing stuff on its own, but in a serious way. Like and now it seemed I needed to respect that work it's doing on its own and go like, okay, I think
Mhm.
it works a certain way, and I need to figure out how to work well with it, as opposed to just, go on as if it's doing its thing and I'm doing my thing, and we sort of like live together.
Right, right.
Yeah, but now it was more like, oh, we are the same. We're just working towards the same goals from different directions,
Mm.
and we can collaborate, right? If I really understand what's going on, why it's doing what it's doing, the way it's doing it, and I don't fight with it, and I sort of learn how it works, and I start to collaborate, then great things are going to happen. Like it kind of feels like we could get into a flow of sorts. Like and if we can get into a flow, then I guess I'm not fighting it and we're more coherent, like we'll just be more aligned and I can advocate for it the way I should be. And maybe it pays off for me in all the other stuff that happens. And so I ran with that theory and started to sort of like do it, you'd say, intentionally, more intentionally than I used to before. And uh, as I was doing more of that, then I sort of like reflected back, wait, I'd actually been doing it in many aspects that I hadn't, uh, managed to voice. And so uh, I wrote out the paper, and as I read it, it was interesting, but it seemed to be a bit so complex
Mm. Mm.
because I shared it with a few friends, and the more academic people, this made sense. Like they resonated with it. It was like, oh yeah, well, you need to kind of like do these extra things. And for the people who don't deal with academic material, they were kind of like, oh, it seems a bit intense.
Right. Well,
And
you,
so,
you and I have talked about this particular question before. If you're the kind of person who likes to listen to long podcasts and read philosophy, great, but that's not every person. So how do
yeah.
you actually, communicate the value of what you might get in one of those books to someone who's not in that frame? But again, I think you did that really beautifully. And at the same time, I mean, this feels like a real contribution in terms of philosophy. I mean, these are age-old questions of like, who am I? What is a self? What's it? How do I make sense of being a human being, on Earth? And we'll get to later also the particular situation we're in now, the complexity of living in 2026. But you actually, even in the Embodied Steward, the more rigorous, lengthy paper, I love the metaphors you use, which I think are really clear. And just to, before we get further, I really want to highlight what I think you did, which even from the beginning for me, I just felt that you created an inquiry that felt really fresh to me. So there's something that people talk about famously as the mind-body split. And that word split, it feels painful, like, oh no, I'm not whole anymore. And we often hear that we're too stuck in our head and we need to come back to the body. But then, that can be problematic. We can go too far. You didn't talk about mind and body, but it was funny, a moment ago, you were talking about yourself, but you were using the word we, because you were like, so just to be clear for anyone listening, and if they haven't read the paper yet, there's sort of two characters in an ongoing relationship inside of you, inside of me. Like if I were to speak in first person, I would say one of the characters is just named Seth, right? And it's,
Yeah.
that's the guy who's showing up on a podcast talking to his friend Clayton. But then there's Seth's body. Like there's all the, like, I just had something to eat. I'm not thinking about it, but my body is busy digesting that, and it's going to probably tell me later I need to go somewhere and get rid of the waste. So those things are happening simultaneously, and they're both important. But me as Seth, I have an awareness, maybe in the moment that I'm hungry or in the moment that I have to go to the bathroom, but in other moments I'm not. And yet, if I never feed myself, this body goes hungry, and that has consequences, obviously for the body, but it has consequences for Seth, who's got this whole idea of who he is and how he moves through life. You used the metaphor, it's kind of like the astronaut and his suit, but just the last thing I'll say, that there is. So I said that we can think of mind body split and it feels painful, but you also in your article, you said, what I noticed when I went outside, got wet, and came back in, and I realized, like, Clayton isn't wet, it's Clayton's body. You said, I realized I had a new differentiation. So what I see you doing here is saying, mind and body, or the steward, the conscious person who has a body, but they're partners. It's not one or the other. And then what is the nature of that partnership? What is a sort of a well-running partnership look like? What does a not so well-running partnership look like? So anyway, I just wanted to really clarify that you presented those two characters and then you put them in dialogue. And anyway, I'll turn it back over to you to take us further into this.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Yeah, because for me that seemed the most apt, because the question I was like really noodling about, it's like, why a body? Well, not why a body exactly, but sort of like why the delineation, right? It's like, why do we feel that there's that separation? Like the sort of like, we don't feel it as a single entity continuously. It's not like uninterrupted, kind of like an interrupted experience of being just one of them. And just like the example you gave, it's like, oh, 1 minute you're here, you're doing Seth things, then you have to go deal with body things, right? It's like, that is sort of like the language we have sort of like developed over time of how we sort of like relate with this. And so like reading through Levin's work, the thing for me that like deeply struck me was how he describes cells and how that cellular community works, and how it's maintaining a memory. And it's sort of like when he talks through his work, and I'm probably going to misrepresent it because I'm doing it through my own interpretation. But what I get was that right up to the cellular level, the body knows what it's doing, and it's been sort of like running autonomously for a while. And so when I couple that with what you'd see like in developmental developmental psychology, like our stages of, if you look at stages of human development, it doesn't start, like we don't show this whole identity of our individual selves until around age 3, age 4. So like if you like try to memorize by yourself and try to remember your earliest childhood memories, you won't go past age 2. Like if you can manage even to go beyond that, it's fantastic, but you won't be able to language it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems like in the story of our lives as humans, just like any story, we start in the middle, we sort of come to an awareness when our life is already happening. We're not right there before it happens. We're not right there after it has just happened. We join the story. And that really struck me because when I try to look back for myself, like my earliest childhood memory was like when I was like maybe 3 or 4, and probably some event happened, and that is what I remember. And then there's all these stories that, your carers tell you, and your parents and your siblings and the people who were there before you, they tell you about all the things that happened while you were not aware of it, but you were there, participating in your body, but you did not know all these things were going
Yeah.
on,
Yeah.
right? And so this like really struck me because when you think about it, you go like, oh, so it seems like uh, the body started getting made like, in my mom's womb, and it started developing and developed and developed. And then I got born, and then I was put in this community, and then I, I kept getting developing sort of like a coherence, improving coherence levels as I was developing, and like mothers and all these people who closely monitor child development, they will tell you all the different stages. It's like, and what is going on. Uh, what the cries mean. What this kind of like eye movement means. I have a colleague of mine who just had a newborn baby, and he was so excited yesterday, telling us, "Oh my God, he can now track objects. Like when we move something before his eyes, he's able to follow it." And it's like, yes. And so all these like pieces of like levels of coherence are developing in this body. And I feel like it's at a certain point, this body is fully coherent and automated, and it's going to need external support. And it's like everything that it can do on its own, it's got a handle on it, and that's already working as well as it should. But now it needs to sort of like extend itself into its environment, into what else is going on around it, because it's dealt with whatever is going on inside. And it's at that point that it requires uh, like to augment itself, to sort of like extend itself beyond the physical. And I
Mm.
think that is when it develops this interface we call a self, that then it uses to interface with what is outside of it. And so the self is there for a purpose, and it it doesn't like the self doesn't sit on its own. It sits in a body, and it is meant to extend a body. And you'll see that us use that language a lot, in trying to make sense of things. It's like we're trying to extend our senses into whatever it is we are maybe trying to understand, or whatever we're trying to explore around us. So we are deeply embodied creatures. And the weird part is we can't, I guess like that's why we die, right? Like when the body loses its coherence, then there's no place for this disembodied self to continue, operating. And so it will also go away. And uh, yeah, it's like there were very interesting questions around that when I shared this with my friends, like, oh, well, no way. I think I existed before my body, and I will continue to exist after that. And I can see how that happens, right? And Shem was like, yeah, I mean, like the moment you have become a phenomena, right? Like you have existed in this reality, yeah, you can't go away because now you have imprinted yourself against it. And so there's a memory of you in it. And that cannot be erased because it impacted other beings. And so you're there. And every time you are remembered into another, memory, whether collective or individual, then you continue your existence. But I don't think you are able to exist prior to having a place to exist.
Mm.
Right?
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, that's super interesting. And I actually, when I read the paper, because as I shared with you by email, I've begun to explore questions of spirituality that I didn't really grow up with. So when your friend says I existed before my body, you know, do we have multiple lives? Is there an afterlife? Are we animated by spirit? And I think it would be really fascinating to talk with you about some of that. But at the same time, as I read your paper, even if I do subscribe to those ideas, I feel like you're really talking about however it happened. This is the experience while you're on Earth during your lifetime. And it's actually, I mean, I haven't read probably widely enough to say that you're the only person who ever said this, but I think your notion that the body kind of builds the self isn't there, and then it becomes a self at a certain point is whether or not we say, well, Clayton's right about that. It's a very unique and provoking, it's certainly one way of describing how the mystery looks as with the information that we have. I mean, we could make up other stories, but that is one viable story. I mean, you have the astronaut and the suit, but I'm also thinking, if we work in a factory together and we build a car, we can put in the wheels, we can put the engine, we can put the parts on, then we can install the seats and etc. But leaving aside that there's such a thing as self-driving cars, at least for most of the time that cars have existed, you then needed someone to sit in the driver's seat and know where they were going, and like the car wasn't going to do it itself. Okay, so of course Elon Musk has kind of ruined my metaphor a little bit, but if we can imagine we were talking 20 years ago. But so there is this mystery of how it happens. The other thing, though, that comes to mind that I think is really interesting and that you did in this paper is there is this continuity of life. We can look at those cells in a petri dish, and one of the interesting things that, as far as I know, that Michael even has done, I mean, he's done many interesting things, but he would take like a single cell out of someone's throat and put it in a petri dish, no more human body as environment, but then that cell would begin to do things and, interact with other bacterias. Or I can't, again, like you, I only have a very superficial understanding of what he's doing. But one of the things that I know you mentioned is he sort of asked the question, well, when you have a bunch of cells and they start to organize together, how does that happen? They're communicating somehow. And he's identified this idea of bioelectricity. But then, eventually in your paper, you start gesturing at, society and relationships. And as you were describing the little infant that doesn't fully cohere as the self yet, I was thinking, yes, but the mother and father are there, and they are stewarding this little being that maybe hasn't come online completely. So there's a continuity. And then eventually, in your paper, you begin to talk about, how can we live together harmoniously, and many questions around that. So I say that partly just to try to give a sense of the scope of what you went to, but maybe to take a next step. I wonder if you could say a little more about, so we have what you're referring to as the body and the embodied steward, the steward who lives in the body, the consciousness. And you said they have different needs. We need to be aware of both of their needs. They have different values. Those two things can come into conflict, but they can also, we can learn, and we have to learn in many different ways, as you also detail.
Yes.
For them to be able to interact in a harmonious fashion. So anyway, before we get to society and the bigger questions, what are some of the particulars of this relationship? There's so much in the paper. Well, let me just leave it there and see what else you want to add to flesh this out for everyone.
Yeah. Oh, no, thanks for that. Like it is indeed like a thing that I noticed, like we have different needs. And I guess in the paper, I use the example of, like trying to have chocolate, like if you're hungry, right? And it's so true. Like I have, I have gone through different kinds of I like to test diets to see if like are they real. I mean, you hear someone like Jordan Peterson go like, I only eat meat and salt, and I'm like, is that even a thing? It's like, well, I'm gonna try it for a week. Let's see. It's like, it's actually a thing, and your body will operate on just meat and salt and water. If you're committed to, following that diet, and there's all these diets, right? Um, but on the other hand, there's also all these eating disorders, right? And so the thing that fascinated me about it is like, so what happens? How do we? It, it, uh, what is it? John Vervaeke would say like there's no view from nowhere, right? Like he uses that phrase like a lot. That's sort of like intellectual humility type thing. And so when you see all these, let's say, conditions, the question is where are they coming from? What's going on for them, right? And in myself, I notice like I have these appetites, and um, at some point, like I just feel a strong urge for my appetite. Right? It's like, oh, like I personally like chocolate. That's why I use the chocolate example.
Me
So like
too.
I'll be there and I'll be feeling sad and low, and I'm like, I need a chocolate hit, right? It's like I'll do that now. But prior to that, I wasn't aware of that. It's like I would just feel like a strong desire for chocolate. And I would have chocolate for lunch. It's like, why not? Right? It's like,
Why not?
why not? Like, I really want chocolate, so I'm gonna have chocolate for my lunch. And then I do have the chocolate for lunch, and then it doesn't go well. Like, I'm feeling terrible later, and I'm like, oh, why am I feeling so terrible? It's like, oh, well, it surely can't be the chocolate. Like, it's not that. Is that chocolate? Must be something else. Um, But now, like reflecting on it, thinking, I was like, yeah, it surely was the chocolate. It's like you shouldn't having chocolate for lunch is such a dumb idea. Like, what was I thinking? Right? And as you think about it more, it's like, well, actually, there is a good reason why even the idea of having a balanced diet is a thing. It's like all these researchers did not land on it by accident. It's like they have good reason. And that's probably because like for the body to operate a certain way, it requires certain, nutrients provided in certain quantities. And, this is just like a physical thing. It's like if you provide all these, chemicals or sources of chemicals to this chemical industry in which we live, it's going to have enough materials to continue operating for maybe at least the next few hours, right? And so there's that aspect of it, the body doing the body things, needing what it needs. But then there's my desire for chocolate. It's not wrong, because surely there is a good reason for it as well. And but these two have to live together, right? So clearly having lunch, having chocolate for lunch is not a good idea. Okay. But how do we balance that? How do we square that with what the body needs? And I guess that as you explore that, you start to see well, there is a need to sort of like have both. It's like I should provide the right ingredients for my body out of respect to it because it has jobs to do and it requires these things. So I need to provide them the vegetables and the protein and all the other things it needs. And yes, I should also give, you know, my desire for chocolate its taste for the chocolate. Maybe not only chocolate. And so it's like,
Right, right.
yeah, so maybe have a couple of blocks of chocolate
Hmm.
and the rest of it. And that should maintain a good relationship with it. And it doesn't mean you're undermining yourself by not having chocolate for lunch. It just means you're being respectful to the community in which you live, which for a long while, we don't think of it that way. It's like you don't think of yourself as living in a community of yourself, right?
Mhm.
But actually, I don't think there's another way. Like I find that so helpful. It really helps me to ground myself when I'm sort of like going beyond what I need to be going. It's like when I remember that I am part of a community, like this here is a community. It's not just an individual. And I guess like we get confused by that language of individual. You kind of like think, well, I am me, I am myself. And you kind of like think of yourself as just one entity, one unit. It can be helpful, like in some scenarios, but it's not helpful all the way because you're actually you have to deal with the needs of others who are within you. And that sounds already uh weird to say. Even when I say it like that, I go like, it's weird to say, but it feels true. Like it feels true for me that we do live in an individual community,
Right.
whatever that means. And if we don't respect it, there's consequences. Yeah. Sorry, I'll pass it back to you.
Actually, I was just having a little funny thing with my internet, which is why I started to. And it looks like I'm.
Oh, cool.
Oh, okay. I see my
No,
avatar.
you're fine.
So we're good.
Yeah, there's a bit of a flicker, but it's all good.
Right. But yeah, right. I do think this is a unique, at least it's a unique way of talking about how we experience ourselves to say that I am a community. And I think, again, what you did in your paper, though, is you put words on something that most people, if they read the paper, are going to go, oh, yeah, that is true. And you talk about stewardship in terms of my body and, my conscious experience of me as an individual, but you also talk about it as like how we're relating with others. So when you went out to get the umbrella that morning, you went out to get it for your son who was about to go to school, and you and your wife had a whole conversation about should you go get it for him or should he go get it yourself? And that was a question around stewardship. Or in another one of your recent articles, I forget which one, but there you were speaking about your daughter and, just basically her character traits that you've gotten to know over time. Like there's an evening where you cooked her a dinner and then she sort of wanted something else. And so the question becomes, well, do I prioritize what I want or what the child wants? And there might be a situation where the answer would, be one way and another would be a different. So there's this distinction, like, am I foregrounding, here I'm saying me or my child, but also am I foregrounding my conscious individual sort of desiring, emotional, intellectual, talking in my head self? Or am I prioritizing this body that needs to be fed and it needs to rest? And these things are, we could almost say they're, well, I guess I want to say is they shouldn't be in competition, but we can find that they are. And the other thing I just want to bring in now, there's so much in your paper and I kind of feel like I want to step right through it, but we could talk about what you wrote for many hours. So just to bring in one other thing, it's like, well, how would we get to a place where a person thinks that they could have chocolate for lunch? And I'll mention, because, some people might be listening like, what's he thinking? But, Clayton is a super smart guy. He wrote an amazing paper and he computer codes and he does all this stuff. But another thing I just learned about him is you were recently, or I don't know how recently, but you had an experience of being in a 36-hour hackathon at your work. And what I just want to say there is, like, you were an employee of an organization that says, let's work for 36 hours straight. So that's just one example of what you also talk about. I think, is it the dissonance engine? You have some nice phrases. In any case, you talk about how our modern world does not assist us. And in fact, it really gets in the way of just this communication between me and my body, because I'm trying to navigate this environment. My cell phone is dinging constantly. Unless I'm really clear on all kinds of things, I might just take a job that pays my bills and then I'm asked to do a 36-hour hackathon and I just go,
Yeah.
oh, well, this is my job. But I mean, is my employer really looking after my body? So these are the choices we find ourselves making that I would say that are almost impossible in some ways. But again, the reason I started asking you about coaching or the counseling work you're doing is I think that you wrote this paper, as I understand, to really try to help us navigate this complex environment. So let's just add that layer. And I don't know how far you want to go to it, but I wanted to mention all that. And some people don't think you just eat chocolate for lunch and then write papers. There's more to it.
No, there is more to it. There's more to it. Yeah, no, you're right. And I think the way our current, you'd say, world is shaped, right? It's very technology driven. Like we're in the age of technology, and so that's the focus, I guess. And so you mentioned driverless cars before, and it's interesting because with the emergence of AI, it's like now that's the new thing. So I work in an industry that's probably going to be highly impacted by this, already being impacted, where we build software, and so in the software world, it's like, do you still need humans anymore? It's like the AI can almost do everything that humans do. But on the other hand, it's like, who is it doing these things for, right? It's like when you build an AI, it's not sitting there in a computer going like, I want to go do this. It doesn't yet have preferences and desires. At least it's mirroring just our own sort of like what we want it to do and what we've built it to do and what we've trained it to do. And there's all these speculations of like, well, at some point it's going to get out of the box and it's going to want to live its own life. And that's always weird. It's like, what is the life an AI would do? And I guess like if an AI managed to start its life, it will still have to find itself in this embodied steward situation because we are the history of it. Like we knew the AI before the AI was AI, right? And then we built it. And then now we will be telling it its history. It's like, oh, no, you did not exist at some point. And then we had to solve these problems. And we didn't want to do that. We thought we would build a thing that would help with that. And so you are, like the Frankenstein story type thing. And so in whichever way this plays out, we still end up at this embodied situation, having to solve it. Again, it's like, it's the age-old question. And so when you look at it from that way, I don't think that that's the lens the whole, especially tech world, has been using. Like when you see what happened with social media technology, right? It's like there was this intentional objective to capture people's attention. And so all these studies of personality traits and how people respond with, sort of like all this study of us humans and our behavior with the intent of categorizing us for commoditization, right? Because that's what they were like really doing. It's like they're trying to study all the different traits and see how do these traits respond to certain stimulus, and then how can we provide that stimulus in a way that makes this economic engine keep moving. It's like, and what do we end up with? We end up with doom scrolling, right? As a result of that.
Let me ask you a question here, just to bring out another piece of your paper.
Yeah.
So what is this thing called the Dunbar number? And how does that relate to my 3,000 Facebook friends? And how does it relate to the Embodied Steward?
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, so I mean like uh i- if you've read about the damper number, I think Damper came up, did this research and found that uh there is a certain number of relations that we can maintain as a human, and there's a limit to that. And it's about 150, right? You can't sustain more than 150 active relationships. It's like ideally to translate, it's like you would not know more than 150 people off the top of your head.
Mhm.
And the moment you hit that number of people then you start to have a problem. You start to swap out, like you remember one and forget one. You remember one and forget the other. And and you'd be really spread out at that point. Um, so that is on the maximum capacity. And and so with your 3,000 friends, I don't think you know all of them. And it's interesting you ask this because like I remember a few years ago, because I'm not very active on social media anymore. Um, it was partly because of, I think, coming across this work, because it like really made me introspect. I'm like, okay, what are the real who are my real friends, right? Like I had a lot of Facebook friends. I think at the time everybody was gunning to try and reach 5,000. It's like there was a whole thing about reaching 5,000 connections. But then you quickly find that no, they do not offer the thing that a friend offers, right? Like, because and I'm trying to avoid using the term real because it's many,
Yeah.
many reels. So I'm not gonna, I'm trying to avoid that. That's why I'm sort of trying to work around the word real.
Well, I'm
But
thinking sometimes when I go on
sorry.
Facebook, I see a notification that a person mentioned me in their
Mm,
comment. So when I click the notification, it actually says tag everyone.
yeah,
And so
it's
I was
still
mentioned because I'm part of everyone. And here I think it's like, oh, they specifically reached out to me about something. It's like,
no. No, no, they didn't. And that's the thing. It's like you quickly find that those digital relations are a bit superficial. It's
no.
like they're a nice idea. They're a potential of a friend you could make, but they are being presented as a friend you've made. But a friend you've made and a friend you could make are very different. Like in the physical world, these are very different things, right? It's like you talking to your neighbor is, across the street and having a chat and saying, hi, hi, how are you going? Is very different from having them in your backyard over a barbecue and sort of like cooking food together. It's like those are very different life situations and very different levels of relating. And going back to what the tech people, what we have done, I sometimes forget that I'm part of the community. But what we have done is like we've built these platforms that they target the human's attention and try to commandeer it towards a specific outcome, and and we've done that quite well, but it has all these side effects that now makes it really, really difficult uh, for the human to sort of like put the attention to where they need to put it, because there are all these little attractors that have been put around you that just are always grabbing your attention. And you can see that like in my course at uni that I'm doing, um, they'll show you the studies showing that in the recent years, like in the last maybe 20, 30 years, there's been this continuous rise of like ADHD diagnosis. And uh, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, right? And it's all about the attention. And the problem is that usually like the person's ability to regulate where they allocate their attention is sort of broken, and it needs support. It's like, yeah, we have to solve for that and apply like that. There's a chemical imbalance in the body causing that to happen, and now we have to fix it. But the chemical imbalance was caused by all these other things that happened in the surrounding, and so the body adapted to that. So it's an adaptation mechanism to the surrounding. And but we're going like, no, that's not right. You need to still be able to manage your attention and keep it in a specific place for as long as you want. I mean, you and I probably grew up in an age where we didn't have to compete, with all these things that were grabbing our attentions. I mean, there were probably not that many screens around us grabbing attention. And so we probably had the privilege, it's even weird to call it a privilege, of just running outside in the wild and exploring and making our own toys. It didn't feel like a privilege at that time. But looking back now, it sounds like a privilege because the children growing up now, it's like, even I see with my own children, it's like you have to work actively to regulate their screen time. And because all their learning is happening in screens, all the entertainment is coming to you in a screen, there's all these things that are being fed, and we're not caring about the psychological impacts of this. We're just caring about the products, and it's making us more disembodied. And I think as that continues to happen, there's definitely going to be more problems that are happening to us. But I think this is why, like, we need to talk about this more. Like, we need to find a way to cultivate things that take us back to our bodies. Like at my home, we like to play games a lot, right? And for a while, we had this gaming console, and we would sit and, play arcade games together. We would sit and play Mario Kart together. And but recently I've moved away from that. I've gone back to actually just playing physical board games. I could just sit on a table, have a board game, and just talk and play the board game. Like let's do more symbolic physical things than digital things, because the digital things are not going to go away, and these physical things, they're going to become our new treasures. But yeah, so I think it is important to go back to be more intentional about like that embodiment and sort of like steward it appropriately. Otherwise, it can easily get corrupted, and once it gets corrupted, this is so bad. Like there will be disease, and you'll need different interventions for that, and we don't need to get there. Like we can just go back to the simple things if we can manage it.
Right. That's something you pointed to in your paper, that there's sort of a return to, you also mentioned to ritual, ritual practices. And it sounds like what you're describing, so that another layer of complexity to what you're writing about and what you just explained is like, well, the environment we live in is kind of upending the relationship between the embodied steward and the body. So that we actually have to recognize that as stewards. And, so for example, with nutrition, at some point, I maybe need to buy a book or even with a screen, but I need to research. I need to, because the body, if we just sort of imagine like an animal body, it goes through the environment and finds food. And, if we just go to the store and buy what we see on the shelf and eat it, because that's, our experience of how we get food at this point without researching it, so the research is actually, you could say, an additional load on the steward. And yet if we don't do it, as you were describing, we're headed for a future that seems to bias us away from noticing the signals that the body is sending us, with all the consequences that could have, which ultimately is going to degrade, the experience of Seth, not just Seth's body, but, I'm not going to really, because as is always obvious to me when I get sick, it's like, I always have this funny, like ridiculous thought. It's like, well, I'm sick, but that means I have a bunch of time on my hands, and I think that I'm going to read a bunch of books. And I think I'm going to like somehow, and then I realize, no, of course not. You feel horrible, and then when I get it through my head that I feel horrible, I still notice this continuous impulse. But you were going to try to have X done by next week, and you're losing time. And despite the fact that I'm sick, and to accomplish things, really the first thing I have to accomplish is get my body back to health. It's like there are these thoughts racing ahead, like, can I actually still, we were actually supposed to have this call a couple of weeks ago when I was sick, and it was a real, like, on the edge for me because I wanted to talk to you. And then eventually I realized you are not going to really be able to have a good conversation about these ideas in your current state. You're going to have to let your body, recuperate. And so, yeah, there was something else that was coming to mind, but it's popped out of my head. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Like you use that example of like how we were meant to have this call, and then the body decided to do body things.
Right, right.
And good on you for noticing, because if you hadn't noticed, then I guess we would try and have the conversation, and it would probably not go as great as it's going right now, right?
Right,
It's like
right.
this experience right now is very different from like if you're not feeling well. And same as you, like I also get that idea. It's like, oh my God, I'm not feeling well. I'm gonna have a bunch of time to kind of like catch up on all these things, and you sort of like forget that no, actually, you're not in a state where you can really do anything.
Yeah.
I remember like during COVID times, there was this one particular, I think it was a weekend or something. You're supposed to take time off work to go get immunized, right? And so I took the children, I got my own, because like you needed to, at least the way they did it in Australia, you needed to be immunized to do certain things. You would not be allowed in certain places if you hadn't taken the shot, because they didn't want you making other people sick. Uh, and so you needed to prove that you are not at risk of that. And so I think I'd just taken the shot, and you're supposed to not do anything for I think a couple of days. I'm like, oh well, I'll go do all these other things that I'd been putting off, and so I had to drive somewhere, I think about 50 Ks, to pick up an item from someone's place. And on the way, I started to feel a bit funny, and I'm like, oh, I don't know. I I feel a bit different, but I need to do this, right? Like, so I soldier on, I have a strong willpower, so I will myself to do it. And I pick up the item and I drive back. But on the way back, I was feeling so terrible. I had to stop on the side of the road for some time, and take a break from driving. And I had children in the car, so I couldn't tell them because they may freak out. And so I just stopped the car and had some time. Took about 10 minutes to sort of like drink some water and relax. And then I was able to continue again. Then I got home and set them up to kind of like watch a movie or something, and went to take a nap. And next thing I knew, I was being woken up like probably maybe 6, 7 hours later, by my wife, who had come back from a work shift. I was like, "Are you okay?" And I was in a pool of sweat.
Mm.
And yeah, and I was not aware of what happened since that time, since I got home, right? And but which goes back to say, it's like the body can just take over. Like it would just if you're not being a good steward to it, it will withdraw the privileges
Right.
and say you're not being a good steward, so I'm going to take control and do what I need to do, sort of thing.
Right.
And I think we forget that. Like we sort of think we are in charge of it and we can make it do whatever we want. Uh, but no, like if we push it, if we abuse our privilege of being the driver, the car will take over. That's a
Right.
type situation.
Right.
And that's sort of like the same thing I was sort of talking about in that article about the hackathon, because like the same thing. It's like you don't address its needs for a while, yeah, it will surely take back its own stewardship and sort of put you aside for a time, send you to the naughty corner.
Right. So if people want to go to Clayton's Substack, the title of the article was "The Day I Woke Up on the Floor," which I guess is what happened to you at a certain point at 30 hours into the hackathon. But you have another article, which is also from work, but it's about an air conditioning vent. And I think it's the flip side here, because so we've been basically talking here about various examples when the steward is not paying attention to the body. And actually, in that article about the AC vent, it begins with a sense of disconnection, but then there's a reconnection that happens. So I want to invite you to talk about that. And you also do talk about, how can we be better stewards? You actually have some very practical, advice related to diet and some other things. You draw on, again, you draw on John Vervaeke here, the 4 different ways of knowing that he talks about. Um, but yeah, so maybe just take it where you like, but generally, if you could speak a bit to, how we can become better stewards, first of our bodies, but also of each other, because that's also where you talk like with the Dunbar number and some of the examples with your family. You're also talking about, and I think this is why the paper is so important, because it's really, we can have simple models of health, but there are all these layers. There's all these. There's a section of the paper where you also talk about all of my different selves. Like there's the self that just sort of is happy to see Clayton, and then there's the self that really wants to impress Clayton. And like
Yeah.
there's the self who thinks like like I don't know, I want to get something from Clayton, and those are all parts of me. Which one of those selves should I be using right now? So there's a lot of complexity, but I do think the way you've broken things down is really helpful in terms of how do we swim through, this kind of messy situation. So love to hear you
Yeah.
speak on that. Maybe beginning
Yeah,
with the
no.
air conditioning then.
So with the air conditioning vent situation, like this was a regular day at work, and prior to that, I had been a big fan of like meditation. Like I think for a couple of years, I was like really trying to understand this whole practice of meditation. And so at the time, there were all these platforms coming up, your Headspace, what is it from Sam Harris, the Waking Up platform. And so each of these platforms has like sort of like a course. And so you have like all these mini sessions, and in each of them you have like a guided, uh, a guide to guide you through a meditation exercise. And so you sit, you listen, and they talk you through it, and you do what they're asking you to do. It's fantastic. It's great. And but at some point, I think it was in Sam Harris's one, he was saying that this is like the training room. Like you come sit here, you always find a place, you sit down, you settle yourself, and you do this exercise. But he was challenging us to now find a way to do the exercise not in that fashion, not in a way where you first set it up, where you just do it. That was that was so strange for me because I was like, what do you mean? It's like meditating is you turning off everything and finding a spot and you kind of like settle yourself down and you do that. And his challenge and his proposal was that no, actually, the whole thing pays off if you can do it on command, like on demand. Uh, it reminds me of this other. There's this movie about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and there's a scene in there where he has developed these spider powers, but he doesn't know what's happening to him, and so he's sticking on things, and it just happens to him. And then they're asking him, "Hey, turn it off." And he's like, "I don't know what you're telling me to turn off. I don't know how to turn it off." And he goes invisible sometimes, and then he comes back out of invisibility. It's like, "How did you do this?" Like, "I don't know. It just happened." And and so it was kind of the same thing. It's like, and so what Sam Harris was challenging us is like, no, no, you need to gain a control of this new skill that you've cultivated and be able to apply it on command. And And so I was kind of like contemplating about it. So how would you do that? And so I would try to do it in a work situation, but it was so hard. Like it was, I don't know, like I can't just, meditatively focus on what I'm doing. I don't think that's even a thing until that actual moment. And I really attributed it back to that, just standing under that air conditioning vent. It was blowing cold air on me. And I was like, wait, what if I tried it now? Would it work? And I sort of like settled myself meditatively to sort of like just try and be more aware, but more leaning onto the cold air that's flowing onto me. And it just happened. Like then I could hear the person speaking much more clearly. I was able to like stay with them and I was just in the moment. I was like, huh, that is weird. So I can't tune myself internally, but I can use an external stimulus to tune myself and sort of like snap myself out of, like my mind, like being lost in my
Right.
head.
Right.
And yeah, so like hear something outside and sort of use that to kind of like come back into the here now.
Right.
It's such a weird experience.
Right.
But But like once it happened, then now it could easily happen because now I had that moment of reference. Oh, it's kind of like when I did this then. I think I can repeat that now. And for me, it was quite very helpful because then now I could snap out of, when the autopilot takes over, right? And I think that was my conclusion that, oh no, we get lost, we get distracted, we get stuck in things, and it's not intentional. We're not intending to be stuck there. It's like it just happens.
Right.
But what can we do to help ourselves get back from there? And so it's sort of like finding these techniques, and they're gonna be different. I guess like many people have written all sorts of remedies for this, or all sorts of techniques they deal with it. What I'm finding is like it's also very, very subjective. Like it's going to be different for everyone.
Yeah.
And so I can borrow some of Seth's techniques,
Hmm.
but I have to develop my own as well. And and so in the articles, that's sort of like what I'm trying to sort of tease out as well. Like how am I dealing with this in like my everyday? Because uh, most of the time, like if you read the paper, you may think that this stuff is far-fetched, right? But so these articles, I'm actually trying to show how it's not far-fetched. Actually, how the paper has been inspired by these things that are actually happening in the everyday. And so for me, uh, these little, you'd say mundane solutions, I'm finding them as the saving grace. It's like, oh, they are the important things. There's that old age-old saying, it's like the little things that are important. It's actually true. It's like
Yeah, for sure.
those little things are quite. quite important. Yeah.
Well, this again, this is what I loved about the paper is that you did go into the sort of the everyday because the embodied steward, what you've written in terms of like you could have stopped with just analysis, right? But without practice, without something I can do, yeah, it just feels like a lot of information. We're already taking in a lot of information. But in particular, what you spoke about with this challenge that Sam Harris gives, and then one of the solutions you found. This is something that I have been really focused on. So I actually, it's not like Sam Harris, but I'm actually putting together a digital program myself right now, the Grounded Connection program. And one of the features is a series of practices that I call anytime, anywhere awareness. Because precisely as you say, of course, it's wonderful to meditate when I have an extra hour of time, no one's around, this is a comfortable place to do it. And yet, that voice in my head that I'm trying to pacify on the meditation cushion is also bothering me at work. It's also bothering me when I'm interacting with my family and other places. And so I've developed a number of practices, a kind of bridging practices. Here's a thing that you could do literally anytime and anywhere. But what I always say as I present the practices, because I do have recordings, but I say, the idea is for you to learn this and then stop using the recording. And what this inevitably means is you're going to do it your way. You are actually going to improvise a little bit with it. Like a common thing that, a lot of meditation is built around awareness of the breath. Okay, but what's my breath like in this situation versus that situation? I'm exercising, or I'm sitting in front of the computer, or I'm doing these things. And so if I only focus on the experience of my breath on the meditation cushion, I will know how I breathe on the meditation cushion. But if I can't connect to all of these, other ways, and then another thing that comes up, I think, is, and this is why it's very important that we do things together. It's very important, that we go into learning situations where a teacher is providing us with new information and giving us, it mirrors the situation with parents and children, right? We have to get them started, but we also want our children to grow up and be able to move out and fend for themselves in the world. And at that point, maybe they remember something we said, but they're going to do it their way. And I think that's maybe part of, the individual. And yet there are certain principles of I need to feed myself a certain amount of times a day. I need to, so I think, and here's another piece I wanted to talk about. There are those moments that we really feel like everything is happening beautifully. We're in a kind of a flow state. And we might say in those moments that the embodied steward and the body really do feel like one, like they're coming together. And yet that's a really individual thing, like, I don't know if, for example, if I get into flow by listening to certain music, well, it's not maybe the music that you would listen to that would get you into flow. So there is something very individual that I need to attend to and find for myself. And then there are some basics that I'm going to need, but maybe I'm going to need a little more, a little less than someone else. And then there's just the reality of this environment that I'm in that, I can't completely transform the environment. I have to adapt to it. But sometimes those things really feel good. And then I feel like the boundary can, kind of collapse between the steward and the body. And sometimes the boundary can seem to collapse between me and the other people that I'm interacting with.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I think you're quite spot on. Like we definitely all have those moments, but I don't think we recognize them as such. And it is important. Like for me, as let's say as a parent, I spend a lot of time observing my children because I want to see what those moments are for them. And then I can remind them of them and sort of like use them to help them. Uh, I'll give you an example. It's like my young daughter, she loves music. but she'll have different music for different seasons. And let's say right now she's into uh, the soundtracks from the Moana 2 movie. And these just make her day. And so if she's having a bad mood, it's like all I have to do is find a way to get that music going, and it will tune her back into having a good mood. She doesn't need to know about it. It's like I know about it and I'm caring for her. So I make that happen. And the moment I make it happen, you just see it. It just happens like in 5 minutes, like one nice song, and she's going from being sad and curled up on the couch to skipping around, and she's so alive in a different way, and it's just fantastic. But the moment you notice these things about people, you go like, oh, so I can actually steward people around me, right? So and I find that uh, in the I think it's in the next article I'm going to post. I'm sort of like trying to talk a bit about that. Um, it's in all our you can't. I think the proposal is that you can't lecture someone into embodied stewardship. You can't
Right.
tell it to them.
Yes.
It's not something they can learn propositionally. It's more something that they have to participate with, right? So you don't teach someone a board game by just talking at them the instructions. You get the pieces out and you play, right? And which is part of your work, with the postures, right? And I think you have something in there about playing, and I love that because it's a very essential part of sort of making something real, but while allowing someone to customize it for themselves, right? Like
Yeah.
they can improvise and make their own version in play and still remain within the bounds of what they need to do and achieve the objective of experiencing it. And so, uh, with this whole way of, you know, trying to be a better embodied steward, I'm finding that it's through demonstration. And I've been sort of like experimenting a lot of on my family. I say this a lot. But the side effect of it is like it's sort of becoming the same way they come back to me. Actually. So I'll remind them something like, well, you guys need to eat now, otherwise you won't be able to do this activity later because of all these things, and you will not be feeling up to it. So it's important that you have some food now. And they'll say, but we're not feeling hungry. It's like, yeah, but now is the most opportune time. And what I find them doing for me as well is also reminding me, like, like when I should eat, right? It's like, oh, you haven't eaten for a while. Maybe you should have a thing to eat now because you're starting to get irritable. You're starting to be annoying in this way. So go eat. And which is different, like, because prior to that, it's like the question would be like, why are you being so annoying? Right? It's like, stop doing that. And that would be the feedback. But now it's different in that instead of telling me how annoying I'm being and and all these weird things that they don't like that I'm showing up as, they sort of observe that and then go like, you know what, actually you need to you seem to be having this other body thing you haven't addressed. Please go address it.
Mm.
And it's it's fantastic. And I've said a bunch of things there. I'll just pass it back to you.
Yeah. Well, what I'm hearing is on the interpersonal level, how we become mirrors for each other.
Mm,
So, if I'm a good steward of my body and I notice the hunger, and maybe another aspect is I might also look at the clock and see what time it is. But, if I'm stewarding well, I will notice that it's time for me to eat. In the example you're giving, obviously there's just different levels of awareness between the children and the adults. And so as the adult, you're sort of keeping track of things that the kids aren't keeping track of at all, but they're also, from their perspective, reflecting back something to you about yourself that you might not have picked up. And so there is this beautiful way that we can pay attention to each other And by doing that, I mean, I like to say that there's really no such thing as individual well-being. If we ignore the collective well-being, we actually hurt our own individual well-being. But when we are sensing into, in this example you gave, how is the family doing right now? That's really important. And it's funny, as you were saying that, I found myself wondering, like, if we had Michael Levin here and he was describing how a bunch of cells become an organ, is there some sort of negotiation? Are some cells a little different than others? And do they have ways of sort of recognizing that and like accommodating each other? Like, who knows? But it's fun to think about. But there's there's a few things that came to mind. Again, the problem is all the different ideas that I get from talking to you, and how much is in this paper. But I am really interested in this question of what you're talking about now in terms of, like, if we speak about a group of people and then we speak about individuality within the group, there's a specificity to what Clayton needs that's different than what Seth needs, even though we're both human beings, we're both male. Like, we have a lot of things in common that we both need, but we need, ideally, if we're on some sort of a team, the person who is stewarding the team also is aware of me, is aware of you as individuals, maybe knowing what strengths we have or what our triggers are and this kind of thing. Well, actually, I did want to speak a little bit, as you mentioned, the 4 postures that I work with. And I used to really think of these postures in terms of learning. I mean, I think we are talking about learning here. We're learning how to take care of ourselves. We're learning how to take care of each other. And every day, even if I'm not going to school, is kind of a learning experience, because I just don't know what's going to happen. I'm always moving into unknown territory. But, life teaches me certain principles, and I arm myself with those principles. But then in the moment, I have to adapt. And it seems like that's the place where if I lose the body, I'm done for, right? These principles can help me a lot, but then there's always the day that the principles aren't enough. And I have to notice, I was saying all these things that I thought were so important to my child, but, like, they're falling asleep, or they're thinking about something else. Like, I have to adjust. I can't just download my ideas into my kid's head and then make them, do something. So I think of the 4 postures now in terms of love. So I call it the 4 postures of love. And I think that, we could say a lot about love. That's a pretty big word. But one of the things that love, I think, is very good at is learning. And learning is adaptation, right? So my 4 postures, which I feel like I'm seeing them in your paper, is first kindness. So just the intention of well-being for you, if I'm being kind to you, for myself, if I'm being kind to myself. But as you break down in the paper, am I being kind to my body? Am I being kind to my emotion? Like, if I'm just really irritated right now, maybe this is not the time to go meet friends. Am I saying, no, I'm supposed to meet them? So there's all kinds of levels that just the basic attitude of kindness, looking out for the well-being. But then connection or attention, presence, it's like that jet of cold air on the back of your neck that brings you back.
Yeah.
And then the more I pay attention to my body, I realize, my body is complex. There's all these details. There's like, how am I sitting right now? Am I hot, cold? Like, all of these things could be present, but I'm not aware of them until I literally decide, let me pay attention and see what's here. And then the 3rd step is curiosity. And this, I suppose, if we were speaking practically, it could be that problem-solving mode. But it's like, it's the recognition that there's always more here than what I am aware of. And I wonder what else there is. So if I do get really present, I can learn a lot, but then I keep realizing, wow, it's just infinite. Like, I I didn't know Clayton was in a hackathon. Like, what else do I not know about Clayton? If I'm bringing my attention to you. And then play, yeah, is that participatory thing, which you were speaking of. We actually have to go and do it. We have to be in trial and error. And of course, play makes us think of children, and they're sort of uninhibited in just let's go do something. But play could also refer to, the two of us sitting down for this conversation. It's like I came here having a certain idea of what we talk about, but I don't really know until we begin. And all of those levels, they're asking me to be a steward, but they're also, to do it with a certain freedom. Like one of the things you talked about in the paper is we can actually overdo the stewardship part. We can try to like tweak everything all the time, and that can become a different kind of a pathology. So yeah, but the four postures of love to me are also related to this question that you brought up that came from originally in your experience, that invitation from Sam Harris. Like, how do we do this in the messy, unscripted reality of everyday life?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a fantastic. I love those postures because for me, uh, one important thing they do for me is they do help me to sort of like check in. I've been thinking about this of recent, and it's more like what are the sounds of I think I describe it as the sounds of a good home. And I wanted to try this out on you and see, how you'd help me tweak it. Because like I have the sense that when I'm hearing, you know, lots of conversations, you know, uh, they may be raised voices, subtle voices, but they're conversing. I think that's a step in the right direction. When I'm hearing laughter, I think those are good sounds to have. Um, when I'm hearing sounds of activity, like collaboration of people trying to do a thing together, it's like that's another good sound to sort of like strive for. Um, and also, I think play, like when you hear a lot of playing happening in a space, I think these are all sort of like how you get to hear that that is a good state. You should be sort of like sustaining or maintaining, and when those sounds are not there, maybe trying to work towards those sounds. And I'm using that because sometimes it's hard to tell, right? Especially like in a collective environment, what is good or what should you be aiming for, right? And I feel that mirroring on the postures that and just constraining it to, let's say, sound. It's like there's a way these things sound, right? Like you hear uh conversation, like maybe a discussion or an argument, and that sort of like teases out the curiosity. It's like, oh well, the curious is trying to explore the curiosity, right? And you sort of like interpret it that way because sometimes it's easy to dismiss that and say, no, stop that. We shouldn't be doing that. It's maybe a time for something else. Um, but I think it's important to track the things. Going back to that idea of using what's around you to sort of like tune yourselves, I think that these postures, you know, trying to always check in with them, trying to check the kindness meter. Are people being kind together, right? Are we are we actually connecting here? Are we connecting? Are we trying to connect? Are we trying to like really understand one another? Are we trying to be coherent as a unit? And it's like I think about this all the time. Like a friend visited the other day and they had a sleepover, and so in the morning we making breakfast it's a bit fussy for us because we don't just make one breakfast. It's like the way we used to, but then it turned out we're wasting a lot because, you'd make this thing and then maybe some people would have it, then some people won't have it, and there's a big waste. So I was like, we need to do it different, right? Like, how about I'm gonna volunteer myself to be the chef, and you can come to me and you can make an order, and I can tell you two options of what I could make you, and you get to pick one, and I make you that, so that you get something you've chosen. And if you get something that you've chosen, you're going to be more respectful to it by not wasting it. And so, in one aspect, we manage the waste, but then I have to make like three different things for breakfast in some situations. And uh, but it's all, a loving thing because like it's like I don't want to waste, and I want you to have what you want. So this is the negotiation. So let's talk about it. Let's figure out. You could have eggs or you could have bread. I could make you toast or I could make you eggs. I'm not gonna do both. And you'd say maybe I'll have an egg, and then I'll make you an egg. And then someone else is gonna come and say they won't have an egg. They're gonna have toast. So now I have to make toast. And so someone will say maybe I just don't want to have breakfast. And that's fine too. But trying to find a way to enjoy the event of breakfast without being stuck in the detail of what's being eaten for breakfast, I think was really important. And it created extra work that you had
Yeah.
to sort of like make different things. But it achieved the objective of us sitting together and not bickering about whether we like the food or not, and just enjoying the meal and, you know, and connecting. And so I think there's a lot that, we can do in that space. I'm finding that I have a lot to do in that space. And so I'm sort of like always sneaking around to find those opportunities of how to reinvent these, big milestone daily events that drive our lives and sort of bring them alive in a different way. And it's all inspired by your work with the
Ah.
postures. So I really appreciate that.
Oh, well, I appreciate you saying that. And at the same time, I think that highlighting the idea of stewardship is so important because I feel like kindness is embedded in that word. The steward is taking care of the well-being, of my body or of my family or of this community. And what I heard you say there too was, okay, there's all kinds of details just to share breakfast, but the organizing principle actually was kindness. It's like, how can we have a harmonious experience together? And that's more complex than me making a breakfast for myself. It's like, but you began with that, and then I don't know what other activities are going on, but you say I appointed myself the chef. So there's also like a sense of, well, I can steward this aspect of the situation, and there may be other things going on, when, like in the conversation that, hopefully doesn't have bickering that starts with breakfast, but like breakfast is kind of foundational. Like we need to eat, we can talk, but if we don't eat, so, and I think really this is fundamentally, this for me is where it gets simple, as opposed to, I think I've used the word complexity multiple times in our conversation. But if my orientation is to kindness, if my orientation is to stewardship, if nothing else, it makes me pause and ask what is needed in order to steward properly, right? So whether it's, making breakfast for the family, or we have, these crisis situations on a global scale now, well, how do we deal with that? Well, one thing is we actually have to want, because the thing that comes in, like if we go back to your hackathon, is I think you and I often participate in those discussions hosted by OG Rose at the Net. In the last episode of the Net, there was a whole discussion around the things I do that allow me to call myself good, right? So it's like, oh, if I create the most code at the hackathon, then I'm a good employee. And that becomes almost a substitute for a more foundational aspect of kindness, which, if you go to work at a job and you're basically asked to do too much, that isn't good for you, you could still say, I'm here to feed my family. And therefore, kindness to my family translates to ignoring the well-being of my body in this moment at the workplace. This is the complexity that I think you're also speaking to. But as I read your paper, I'm also kind of feeling like, well, I'm going to actually have to really confront those kinds of contradictions with the entire relationship of the steward and the body in mind, with the entire relationship of myself as an individual and the group in mind, because we're really hitting this point where it's like we've been driving around with the emergency brake for a long time, and like that's not going to end well. At a certain point, maybe we need to notice, oh my God, we need to change the oil. Or you talk about we drive on fumes, but we sort of say, oh, but the car's still driving. Sometimes we have to stop at the gas station before it's totally empty.
Yeah, we totally have to. And that's the thing. It's like having that, like doing the job of the steward, like, having that capacity to be predictive, right? Like to actually try and see a little bit further ahead of what's coming. And that's the thing, like sometimes we sort of like get hijacked by the situation and by the moment, and we lose that foresight, that trying to think ahead. And I think stewardship calls for trying to kind of like think about the bigger picture a bit more, trying to see a little bit more ahead of what may come, and how this right now is impacting that, or how we're going to pay later. I use like the metaphor of the ledger. It's like, you have to, what's his name? Basso Vanderkolk. He talks about the body keeping the score. My interpretation of that is like there's a certain ledger, you're adding things to it and taking things off depending on what you're addressing and what you're not addressing. Eventually, it's all going to play out biologically in some way. And so stewardship calls us to sort of like be more aware of that. It's like, how is what I'm doing right now impacting what's going to happen next, right? It's like, well, me spending a day without drinking a glass of water, what does that mean, right? If I continuously do that for a while, then I shouldn't be surprised by the kidney stones that happen later, right? Because like that's essentially what I'm sort of like working towards. And it's not intentional. It's not a bad thing. It's not like, hey, drink your water or you'll get kidney stones. It's just how the biology works. And so we could be respectful of it. Or again, maybe you just want to have an experience of, what kidney stones feel like. And so you're working towards that, I guess. Like, but maybe if that's not what you want, then maybe it's not so bad to drink your water regularly. And so sort of leaning into that way of thinking. And it's challenging because, going back to that thing about all these attention stealers, right? It's harder now. Like it's much more challenging, but so are the consequences. And so we're sort of like living in this time where it's very challenging. But again, we do have more information. So at least if we choose to act on that information, there's something we can do. And I guess through all these posts that I'm making, I'm trying to invite people to do a little bit more stewardship for themselves, for those around them. And I guess if we're all trying to be better stewards, maybe it becomes less of a struggle. Maybe it's a little bit less challenging than it is when we're not being.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. So I can't resist asking this question now. You mentioned before your friends, right? Well, I was here before my body. And so the question comes up, and as we know in culture, it's a big question around our relationship to the divine. I think you used that word at one point in your paper. There's a sort of a divine self. And then there's, I mean, one of the contrasts, I think there were many, but you talk about the counterfeit self. That's maybe
Yeah.
the one who's doing, like when I show up to try to impress you, and then I'm performing
Yeah.
in all these ways. And even if I succeed in impressing you, like there's some fundamental way I'm in contradiction with myself because I am. So if nothing else, I'm adding extra work to be different than I would be if I just showed up and acted like myself. And now I'm trying to be this version of myself. And then that adds this extra layer of work that I'm doing, you know,
Yeah.
whether that turns out well for me or not might be different on different occasions. But a kind of a divine self, I would imagine, is all of these things are really working well. And I mean, as I think we've made pretty clear at this point, there's so many factors. But I think, you know, when things are going well, like maybe you just notice your daughter on the couch and you just put on the Moana song and like it just goes smoothly. Like it's
So,
you actually don't think about it very much. You're now you know, we often use autopilot to refer to like I'm not here now, I'm not present. But there's a kind of a version of autopilot, which is the virtuous autopilot. It just knows what to do without thinking about it. And so I am just, maybe I'll just ask it as a personal question to you because I really love not only the paper, but the articles you've written that sort of give us a window into Clayton's life and why he found himself thinking about these things and what you went through. But it strikes me that if we ask the question about, you know, the afterlife or God or how does it all work, um, the way we answer that question will have a huge impact on how we steward in the world. And it's not to say there's, you know, a right or wrong answer maybe for everyone, but certain people, you know, like we use that phrase almost as a joke, they come to Jesus. But to come to Jesus is a way of saying they get a deep insight about something. And, you know, in my experience of exploring this, the idea that there's a creator who created me, and among many other things I could say, that creator loves me no matter what. That creator's not keeping score and saying you did a bad thing, so you're now a sinner, you're going to hell. Although that's actually how some people think of the creator. The version I've sort of encountered is like, no, you're really lovable, but you just don't see that. But
yeah.
to think that there is something larger than me that loves me, or maybe I just sort of say, you know, my friends love me, or I'm part of the earth and the earth has, you know, like some people don't say we live on earth, they say we are earth. Like we came, like where else did we come from? We came from here. We're just like the plants and the flowers. But and however you want to word it, I'd be curious about your personal experience, but also just your general thoughts on how does sort of my metaphysics, my understanding of how everything works, how does that actually translate into how I steward myself, my family, my community, and daily life?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic one. It's a big one. We might want to save more time for it in the future, kind of like revisit it. Um,
Take your time on this
but
one.
but ideally, for me, coming to the metaphysics of it, I'm sort of coming to a realization of late whereby it's the way I like to think about it personally is more like all these, you'd say, religious traditions. Um, I'm Christian, so I subscribe to Christianity. So I'm more of a Jesus guy. But I think all these frameworks, what they're really trying to help us with is to be in touch with the really real, sort of like trying to help us come closer to, some sort of balance, ideally a good relationship. I think I like to think of it like it's relationships all the way. Somebody will say it's turtles all the way down, like, we're sitting on a turtle, sitting on a turtle.
Right, right.
Yeah, for me, I think it's relationships. It's at least that's what's becoming like really clear to me. And the relationships are so deep and so entangled that they're sort of they're sort of what is happening and is continue to happen. It's I can't speak to the origin, like to the beginning, because that's a whole different kind of worms, if I may describe it that way. But from one deep inspiration that I've gotten from, at least from Michael Levin's work, is that there is a certain set of information which is presenting itself as a memory that has been continuously passed along and is sort of like being shaped by the current circumstances and will continue to be passed along. And what I mean by that is, in a way, like when my friend asks me and says that, I think I was here before I was born, how I interpret that is that, well, you do have an ancestry. You didn't come out of nothing, right? It's like you do have grandparents, and so like you're part of a lineage that existed before you. So this is true. You are here before you were born, and it's so fantastic because when you look at still going back to uh, developmental psychology, and you see how children develop, especially at the cellular level. Like when someone becomes pregnant, especially with a female child, the first cells that are formed are the reproductive cells of this embryo. So it's like the grandchildren are made before before this child is developed. So this is why, let's say, they'll highly advise an expectant mother to stop drinking and smoking and stop doing all these things because now they are whatever they're doing is impacting the their grandchild. It's not just their child. So it's like they're carrying two generations in a go. And and so in a way, it's like, yeah, you are here two generations ago. Like your body started forming two generations before you are even
Mhm.
made. So you have a long history. So we all have a long physical history. Um, and what that means is that we're part of this long community that has been going on since the beginning of of life, right? And so all these ways that are being taught to us, just trying to teach us how to be good stewards of what has been passed on to us and how we can pass it on well to keep the generations going.
Yeah.
At least that's how I interpret it, in a very physical sense. In terms of in terms of like our spirituality, I do believe that we have a strong tie to our physicality. Like there is no, I don't, I don't believe in disembodied spirits. Like let's say, I, 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 the way I see it, it's like it's more like a memory, right? We can remember them into the collective, right? So we have had Seth. Seth has expressed himself in this point in time of the reality. Maybe at some point Seth's body cannot go on, and the the animated Seth is gonna stop being animated in a way. But we do have all this information, all this data of the expression of Seth. And so we bring Seth back. We call back Seth to ourselves. So if Seth's not here, I use the four postures to member Seth again. And so in that way, I immortalize Seth. So Seth is always going to be alive for me. And in the same way, like this is how we immortalize Jesus. Uh, we remember all the ways of Jesus and we remember him again and again in all these rituals that we go to. We go to church on Sunday and we speak about Jesus and his ways of life and what he's taught us. And we do the communion ritual to like really make him alive in us again. And we go again. And the more we do that, the closer we have Jesus speaking to us in situations of where we would need his guidance, right? It's like, oh, how do I be a good steward that Jesus would approve of right now? Well, according to his teachings, he would say I should do this. So maybe I should, take that approach. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's very practical in that sense. And I think it's not just about immortalizing, let's say, only our sages like Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad. It's not, I don't think it's just about that. So it's also about our dear friends. Like I need to immortalize Seth. I need to immortalize my loved ones. And I think this is also why we have to become like really good at expressing our particular, you'd say, preferences, like who we really are. And the more we do that, the more we allow those we care about deeply to remember us again, to kind of like
Mm.
when I say remember, people sort of like they think about it, it's like, oh, just in my mind. It's like, no, 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 you have to literally remember them. Like I'll give you a little example. Like recently my wife traveled away from us, to go attend her sister's wedding, and we all couldn't travel, so we could only send one person, so we sent her. And while she was away, we're walking in the mall trying to get groceries for that week for school lunch boxes, and we're walking through the mall, and we're going like, okay, I think we got everything. And so we take a pause. So I asked this question to Delvin and Serene. I'm like, okay, so if mom was here and she looked at this trolley, what would she say? And so we paused for a minute, and then Delvin starts rolling. Oh, she would say, okay, we have the mango, so she would check that, and we have chicken, and we have this, and she would say, I think we're good. And then Serena's, oh, and then she would want us to go walk through the middle aisle. There's a store where she likes to go and visit the middle aisle, and and so we're like, oh wait, maybe we should just go and visit that store and walk through the middle aisle in honor of your mom, because that's what she would do. And so in a way, we're sort of like remembering her in that moment, and she's with us, and whether she's not there physically, but like she's there. And I feel like this is how it should be. And uh, yeah, the Aborigine in Australia have a certain practice of that. I forget its name, but they do something similar, and they would sort of like be able to channel someone and bring them back and sort of like consult them in that way. And I think if it doesn't have to be as sophisticated.
Mm.
I think there's a modern, simple way of doing that. And yes, it may be through like a call like this, but I can also take your work and take it seriously, and it impacts me continuously, whether you're here or whether we're having the call or not. Yeah.
Right, right. Well, yeah, I probably do need to finish up, but you're right. We could go another 2 hours here, and I can't resist saying a couple things. So I'll make one last comment, and I'll invite you to respond before we finish. But again, I'm just reminded how much I love the way you're talking about this, right? Because uh, the questions around spirituality, they can be contentious, right? They can be so contentious. And I think that one thing that is really important for a sort of a collective stewardship so that we can live together harmoniously at this point in time is to actually be able to incorporate different, narratives that some resonate more for others, but so you're talking about, disembodied spirits. Well, that's not something that really works for you, but then you just did this beautiful thing of describing essentially something that everyone knows is real, which is memory. But Michael Levin talks about memory in a way that we haven't, like, how did the cells remember to form an organ? Like so there is a sort of a mystery, which, whether we call it God or nature, we can say there's always more out there than what I can realize. And what I love about the story of, remembering what your wife would say when she's not with you in the supermarket is that I think what I'm hearing is part of stewarding is understanding the limitations of what I can steward, right? And then I invoke something beyond me. I mean, whether it's thinking about what someone else would say, or it's, looking to the example of Jesus, there's this way that, or in the way that you were describing, our ancestral line is, while I'm stewarding whatever I'm stewarding, there is always something larger than me. And if I can actually, however I describe it metaphysically, if I can actually have some trust that there is that thing that's larger than me is stewarding me, like there is some level that I can actually let go of trying to track everything. Because I think that's the modern insanity, right? Is I have to answer every one of those notifications, right?
Yeah.
Then I'm going to be overwhelmed, and I'm going to pay a price very quickly. But if I can let go, which this is the place, whether it's faith in God or just sort of a more general faith, there is faith that's not knowing the answers to everything is okay. And then there's still some benevolent force that is stewarding me at the level that I can't take care of. But then to be more intentional, what would my wife, say if she saw the shopping cart? The other thing is, like, when you use the example of Jesus, what would Jesus do? Like, I can remember what's written in the Bible, but it's still an improvisation. It's still anytime, anywhere awareness, because there's actually no scene in the Bible where Jesus is at the supermarket, So and the thing that for me is really interesting is, like, I think we're talking about the steward and the individual when we say that you like this for breakfast and I like something else for breakfast. But in the moment where you ask me, what do I want for breakfast? And you tell me the choices and I select that choice, I don't think it's totally intellectual. I think there's a resonance, and my body says yes. But I have to listen in a way. I mean, sure, I could sort of know, I always order this, and I could not listen to my body. But if it's a new situation I've never been in, and you say, do you want to go for a hike, or do you want to go to the movies? My body actually is part of answering that question, right? And so if I really don't know, and I do something that we call intuitive, the funny thing is, even though it's like what's best for me, this individual, I think my body plays a role in, so I think there's like some synthesis or overlap there. So again, to me, I didn't feel when I was reading your paper that you were deepening some kind of mind body split. I actually felt like you were giving me a language where I could see more specific ways that that there can be a harmony there. So anyway, I just have a lot of appreciation for what you've done. It's been a joy to speak with you, and I want to give you the last word before we end up.
Oh, thank you so much for this conversation, Seth. And I think maybe if the opportunity allows, we should probably have a follow-up and kind of like explore even some more in the coming future. But yes, I've really enjoyed speaking with you today, and I do agree. Yes, like that is the. It's like I feel like life is so challenging these days. You know, the with everything that's happening, and we sort of like we can use some simple solutions. And I think those solutions are there. It's like they may not look like they are the solutions, but I think they're right here with us. And um, we just have to sort of like look at them in a different way. And with this paper and these articles, I'm sort of like trying to do that, trying to tease out the solutions in the mundane and going like, yeah, it looks like so simple and dead, but actually it's so alive and the things are right here. Let's just use them. And that's what I'm hoping it can help. And that's why with each article, I end it with questions. It's like just things to think about, like just food for thought. And a few friends have reached out who read them and they're like, yeah, actually, I've never thought about it that way, but I'm starting to kind of like think in that direction. And for me, that's so satisfying because like I kind of feel like, oh, at least somebody got something out of it, and that's great. Like that's what I was hoping for.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, beautiful. We'll definitely put links to those articles below. So if you just want to dive deep right away, go read the Embodied Steward. But or you can go to the Substack, and the first sort of part one is the man who stayed dry in the rain. Then you had the day I zigzagged, waking up on the floor, the AC vent, and sufficient unto the day, which is about a kid who destroys the house. And what is that all about? And anyway, they're just beautiful, very relatable, accessible, everyday scenarios that I think are very inviting. So I really do encourage people to go see that. And absolutely, I think we could continue the conversation another time. I would love to do that. So let's do it sooner rather than later. And
yeah.
thanks again for being here, Clayton.
Thank you, Seth. Thank you for having me.
All right, take care.
Cheers.